Well, we know that Wednesdays are all about women in sport, and being a football agent comes with many responsibilities, but the main one is supposed to be getting their clients the best deals. They represent and handle any contract negotiations and should also be advising and guiding through important career decisions, including matters off the pitch. Well, recently we saw a story about Pitso Mosimane and his former employers in the Saudi League, where there were contractual disputes. And closer to home, Moroka Swallows also sacked a truckload of players over salary disputes, and we have several clubs that have been sanctioned by FIFA as well. To zoom in closer into these topics and how they work, we've invited FIFA-accredited agent Basia Michaels right here on AM Report to unpack some of these issues, and she joins us now. Basia, thank you so much for taking time to sit here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Andy. How are you?
Well, there's a number of issues that we'd like to unpack, but before we get into that, we did have you here speaking about your FIFA accreditation. That was quite a while ago. Have things changed for you since then in terms of perhaps getting those big names, and what are the differences that you're noting now that you are a FIFA accredited agent?
The exposure. It's definitely been a ball of emotions with all the exposure that I've received, a number of calls from various coaches and scouts, the MLS, Belgium, France, Spain, Portugal. So I've made extensive connections, and that growth has ultimately led me to a point where I do believe that I'm knocking on the door of doing international transactions each and every season.
International transactions are big. So if you're looking at what it would take then for you to be able to sign your first international contract, what do you think that would be?
A lot of hard work. I'm actually working around the clock to get 3 done right now, in the hope that we actually get them done before June, because it just makes our lives a lot easier if we get things, put it all in a row, because I think with silly season comes a lot of difficulties. But ultimately, it's moving. When you move a player from South Africa to then whichever country they will then move to, it's also about acclimatizing. The league is very important, most important to understand that the footballer will be able to ply their trade in that league and also be able to deal with the difficulties of not having family and support, you know. I'm not a plane away from Joburg to Cape Town. I'm ultimately a plane and a layover away from here to France, from here to the MLS, or which is in the USA, or from here to Belgium. So those are the intricate details that we're starting to look at in terms of making sure that it is the right move, because you don't necessarily want somebody to go overseas and not get the right amount of exposure, struggle with the league, struggle with the country, struggle with the language, and then ultimately come back in 3 to 4 seasons.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that, because I'm mentioning the case of Pitso Mosimane, which is exactly what happened. Left South Africa to go to Al Ahly, and we're seeing now that the FIFA issuing an award for them to get their payment. What are the complexities in instances like that would result in a club perhaps saying, well, we don't want to pay you, or perhaps we agreed a bit differently and there are matters that we need to settle before we can give you the amount that you feel you're entitled to?
Well, this is where the importance of the contract of employment comes in. You know, once FIFA gets involved, you have to understand that it's a foreign transaction, because Pitso is South Africa, and he then didn't get his payment from the Saudi club. FIFA then takes over because they have the jurisdiction, whereas locally ours would be the PSL or the NSL DRC. So when FIFA gets involved, it is a foreign protection. It is them protecting foreigners within whichever country that they're in, and ultimately just ensuring that their rights are protected. And that's very important, because you don't want people moving into a country space where they have no protection.
And people at home would be wondering, then what is the role of the agent in that instance? And in instances where we've seen, again, involving Pitso Mosimane with the ongoing matter with Mamelodi Sundowns now, where there's money that has been paid over, but the agent then had already taken possession of the money, and it's now an issue of trying to retrieve it again. What is the role of the agent here to ensure that you don't land up in these situations?
Look, ultimately these situations are bound to happen. The agent is then there to guide the process, to ensure that, one, we understand the legalese of it. We understand where to go. We understand who the jurisdiction belongs to. We understand which party to involve, and we understand when to move forward from there. It's not something that a layperson would understand. Moela Tlhagale is brilliant at what she does. So for her, as Pitso's agent, was able to put all of this together and ultimately ensure that they've gotten this award against the Saudi club.
76 African clubs sanctioned by FIFA as at January 2024. We're seeing an increase and an uptick in South Africa as well, if you're looking at the likes of Royal AM, current matter with Chipa United as well. Would you say that it's a case of perhaps not respecting the law? What would you attribute this increase that we're seeing to?
I think it's more of a difficulty. It's not necessarily that there's no respect for the law. It's a difficulty in finding a balance between the two, because the same thing happens with nationals. But because Ronaldo for a little bit, we create a balance in relationships. Whereas it is very easy. It's a lot easier to say, I don't agree with what you're saying. I'm not willing to find a common ground. Let me run to FIFA. And you just have to be able to find a balance, whether a foreigner or whether a local. You know, it's very important to maintain a relationship because the world is small.
And if you're looking at the matters now that are currently sitting before FIFA, the ban of Royal AM, Chippa United, who then becomes responsible for the enforcement? Because we're seeing back home instances where PSL doesn't enforce a matter or the award even after FIFA has ruled on it.
Ultimately, it's SAFA who is the mother body, because they are the mother body of football. Then they pass the sanction down onto the PSL. The PSL has upheld a large number of the sanctions that I know. I think the reason the Samir sanction hasn't been upheld per se is because it's still at CAS. There's obviously the dispute that Royal AM feel that the award was quite grievous against them, which is understandable to a certain extent. But like I say, it becomes a balance of interest, and that is very important. The Chippa United one, I do know that Chippa has ultimately paid because he's recently registered Evanga as one of the players after the ban came out against him. So that was something that he overturned and fixed very quickly within a short space of a week, if I'm not mistaken.
So looking at that then, where would you feel perhaps would be the areas of improvement, both in terms of the relationship between agents and players, but more importantly, clubs and players as well?
Basic understanding.
Yeah.
And I say this to a lot of my players. We have to be able to understand, and we also have to be reasonable. But at the same time, the clubs have the same understanding and what we would term reasonable from them to us. You know, it has to be a balance. It really is a balancing act, like anything in life. You have to make a client happy, but the client is also the club. So you have to balance the two in being able to find a synergy in moving forward, because I don't think that there's a footballer that ultimately puts themselves in a position to not want to play football.
But is there really a case where you could find that balance? Because already you're looking at a power imbalance. The club holds all the power. They're responsible for paying you. They can decide if they're going to terminate your contract or not. And with the player, you have very little negotiation leverage. How do you find that balance?
You find that balance from the beginning of the relationship, governed by the contract.
Yeah.
That at X point, this is what the outcome is at Y. At Y point, this is what the outcome is at Z. And if you put your ducks in a row from the beginning, right, you would put yourself in a position where you would not ultimately get to, okay, this is us suing you to get A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Sometimes things don't work. You know, my labor law lecturer always used to say, there's no labor relationship that starts with the end goal in mind. We start at this point, and we're happy at this point. But things might not work out for whatever reason, be it performance, be it club issues, be it salaries, whatever it might be. When we get to that point, how do we deal with it? And I think that that's the missing link between clubs, agents, and then the FIFA jurisdiction of coming in, stepping in and saying, this is my protection. But similarly, the same can be said about outside.
Well, the reason I'm asking this is if you're looking at the Morocco Swallows issue that we saw recently, locally, 20 players, dismissed by the club, a couple of issues that needed to be sorted out. In an instance like that, one looks and thinks, well, the bargaining power doesn't sit with the players. They might have the numbers, but it does seem like the club is controlling quite a lot of what happens there. I know you're involved with some of the players there, but in instances like that then, what is then available and what would you say went wrong there and can be remedied to ensure that we don't have a similar situation?
Look, I think the wrong started a very long time ago. It didn't just start with these players right now.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a reality because I represented Coach Brandon, who ultimately promoted Swallows. So I do think that the wrong started a good while ago. And it's just been snowballing and it got to this point. At the point where we're currently sitting is, and the representation happened where SAFBU represented a number of players from for the union. And I, as well as my attorney, represented the players that were ours, and a number of other agents represented their own players. We protect rights differently because I feel that every individual wants their own outcome. And in my situation, I had 3 separate outcomes from 3 different players. So you have to understand that when you are representing, in a situation like this, a group, you have to look at the individual and what the individual wants. And certain individuals wanted certain things out of it. Some people wanted to go back to work, and some felt that it's just a bit too much for them and they can't handle it. So you deal with it differently. Our recourse in a situation like that is the contract governs that we have to go through a disciplinary hearing, and that's what we did first. Then from there on, we have then the recourse to appeal and move forward from there to the DRC and we've just been following the processes because the agreement was in place from the beginning.
So we had Dibucho Munai here quite a while ago from the SAFU speaking about this particular matter and the outcome being dragged out, and what you've mentioned now with the players being treated differently even though the set of facts was exactly the same. What was the situation there that would lead to that? Because if you're saying, well, all of you stayed away from work, but we're only going to sanction this one, that one, and the other, and you're not applying it consistently, what would the reasons be in a situation like that?
The football club still has to operate.
Yeah.
The football club still has to operate. They are well within their rights. I know it sounds wrong, but they're well within their rights to pick and choose who they wanted. And if you look at the situation, you look at the outcome of how the Swallows matter happened, that is what I feel was actually concocted. It was, these are the players we want, and let's work on it. Whereas relationships are what they are. You never know the relationship between a club chairman, club president, and certain players where, okay, fine, yes, the group did this, but I feel like I have a relationship with this person, let me pull him out, how would you feel? And that goes back to what I said, is an individual makes the decisions. Yes, we're there to guide as agents, and yes, we're there to be able to give the right amount of advice at certain points in time and know what needs to be done when certain things happen. But the reality is the football club still needs to operate, and you're right. The power balance remains with the people that own the club that choose the players that they want to continue working for them.
So you believe the players were cherry-picked. Okay, where do we stand now with the Swallows matter? Because particularly with Andile Jali, there were reports saying, well, you know, this matter has now been dismissed, but it was the urgency of that matter that was thrown out by the court. So one would then think there could still be room for that to be taken further.
Look, I can't speak on the Andile matter, but I could speak on matters that pertain to my own clients. I've got matters currently in the DRC, and we are ventilating that process. So it, like I say, point one was a disciplinary hearing, an internal disciplinary hearing. They tick that box. The next point then becomes our matter in terms of, do we feel aggrieved by the outcome, which, yes, the players felt aggrieved, and then we move on to the next, and now that's exactly where we are. I wouldn't necessarily say that it took time. More than anything else, the wheels of justice, I think you've heard that before, and we have to follow a certain recourse because that's just the way it is. That's just the way that things are designed, and that's most importantly the principle of Audi, where both parties are heard. Is the Swallows have their outcome, this is what they feel they are entitled to. The players have their outcome, this is what they feel they're entitled to. And somebody listens to both sides and then decides where the fairness lies based on either contract, law, or labor relations, and that's very important to understand.
Well, certainly a lot to unpack. We'll leave it at that for now. Thank you so much for joining us, Basia. Of course, Basia Michaels is a FIFA-accredited football agent, just shedding some light on some of the issues that we've seen at FIFA.